Hello, welcome to my sewing summit. I am Tori James from Toriska Patterns, and today I will be teaching you how to make this miniature stocking. Now, I'm not showing you my face today because I am fighting a cold and I did not feel like doing my hair and makeup, but if you want to know what I look like, here is my professional headshot, and here is a bathroom selfie, and that is about what I look like when I do my hair and makeup, which is much better than what I look like today. So this little miniature stocking is so much fun, and it's sized perfectly to be used as a little cutlery stocking at Christmas. You can put it next to your plate and fit your silverware there, or you could just use it as decor with a little hanger, hang it up. You could stick a candy cane inside. You could make this an ornament. You could do all sorts of things with this little stocking. Now, if you've done a sewing summit with me before, you may have seen that I have a full-size stocking that is similar to this, called the Yuletide stocking. You can get that from my website, and Sewing Summit participants get a coupon code that I believe is available on the site for this tutorial. So you can check that out. Here are some other versions that I've made. You don't have to do the hanger, and quilting cotton is my favorite fabric for this. It's fun when you do a whole set and everyone can have one. So there are all sorts of options with this pattern. You can use buttons, rickrack, lace. You could do all sorts of things to make these stockings custom to exactly what you want. So come and sew with me. Let's start by talking about fabric choice. The best fabric for these I have found is 100% cotton, as in quilting cotton, inside and out, and for the cuff. These are both made out of that. I have tried it in a couple other fabrics. This is my the same fabric that I use for some of my larger stockings. It's a jacquard fabric. The inside I use satin and velvet for the top. For some reason this cuff ended up shorter, even though it was all the same pattern pieces. See, these are the same, but they ended up just a little differently. I didn't put any interfacing on the cuff or the exterior fabric for this. That could be the difference. And then this, same pattern pieces with velvet, and it turned out a little bit differently. Satin on the inside, velvet on the outside. So it kind of warps sometimes when you use other thick fabrics. I didn't interface this one either because they were thicker, but it can lose some of its shape that way. So I like to stick with 100% cotton, and it works really well. As for interfacing, I use woven fusible interfacing. I buy it by the bolt, but you can buy it in smaller portions. I like the woven interfacing because it acts like fabric, and here's the fusible side. But you can certainly use non-woven interfacing as well. I would just make sure to get a medium weight interfacing. So for this demonstration, I have picked a few different quilting cotton fabrics that I will be using for the exterior, the lining, and the cuff. If you do them all out of one fabric, you can get about 2 of these from a fat quarter. Otherwise, you can use up your scraps. They really don't take a whole lot of fabric. Oh, and if you want them to have a hanger loop, this is just 3 inches of grosgrain ribbon. That works really well for a loop. All right, I've got my pattern pieces, and I chose to transfer mine to template plastic because I wanted to make sure that I could see. I was fussy cutting some of them, so that meant I wanted to have a specific part of the fabric showing. So that's why I used these acrylics. I used it for this version where I was cutting out specific parts of the fabric. This is quilting cotton on the front. The cuff and the back are a polyester faux silk, and the inside is satin. It worked pretty well. All right, I'm going to use this penguin fabric as the exterior. And I definitely want some cute penguins in the middle, not just the snowmen. So I'm gonna arrange this so that the penguins are right here in the middle. Remember, this part's gonna be covered up. And these have a 1/8 inch seam allowance. Now, this is the way that I prefer to interface. I cut a little bit larger than my pattern piece. And I'll bring over my interfacing. This is a large bolt, so it's kind of unwieldy. And then I cut out my interfacing the same way. This looks like it cut off of it, but there. Cut my interfacing just a little bit bigger than the piece as well. And then I will fuse it on, and then I will cut again. So that's how I prefer how to do it. It's called block fusing. You can fuse larger pieces of fabric and interfacing as well, but for these little pieces I'm just doing that. All right, so I've got my exterior cut out, interfacing and fabric. And I'm going to do this black lining fabric. Now this black lining fabric, I am not going to interface. I find that it just does not need that much interfacing because it's so small. So for this, I am going to cut it out right along the lines, or the edge of the pattern piece, without cutting extra. So this I will not interface, so I'm going to set it aside. Okay, and the cuff is the final part. This is not doubled up because I am only cutting one cuff piece. And this I will be interfacing, so I'm going to cut this a little bigger. Now remember, some fabrics don't really need interfacing. For my velvet version, I did not need cuff interfacing. But just for quilting cotton, I'm going to interface it. And I'm going to get a smaller piece of this woven interfacing that I can cut to the right size. All right, now I'm ready to interface these pieces. All right, I'm ready to interface. So I will turn it right side down and make sure that the glue part of my fusible interfacing is down facing the fabric. This specific brand does not need steam, so I only need to put it on and press it for about 5 seconds, but follow the instructions on your interfacing. Sometimes they require a little bit of steam. interface my exterior. All right, we're now ready to cut these pieces out. All right, I'm going to start with my exterior. I place these together. Actually, what I often do is I cut it together and then I pin the sides. Here's my pins. But remember, I wanted to fussy cut this. I wanted to make sure that I get what I want on the front. So I'm going to put them wrong sides together and I'm going to cut it so I get just the right part of it in the middle. And I always check to make sure that I'm cutting on top of fabric on the back and that I'm not cutting on air in the back. All right, so if you cut it right sides together, you don't have to reposition it. And just put some pins on it. All right, that's ready to go. I should have pinned this or cut this right sides together, and then it would have been easy to pin it right there. All right, exterior lining, all cut. Cuff. So if you've made this stocking before in the larger size, you may notice I'm making the cuff a little bit differently on these than I do my larger stockings. Oops. For these larger stockings, I have a lining and an exterior for the cuff, and the cuff is shaped so it follows the outside of the stocking, and then it's actually not perfectly straight across the bottom. It's a little bit curved, which you can't quite tell. But for this, I just found it is so much easier just to have one piece that will then end up being folded up like that. So since I like to do my cutting and pinning at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and fold the short ends of this together, because that's how I'm going to need it to be when I get to the sewing stage. All right, exterior, lining, cuff, all ready to sew. Okay, we're ready to sew together our mini stocking. I've got the exterior, the lining, the cuff, which I have pinned with the short edges together. And this is optional, but I have 3 inches of ribbon. Also, I tend to use inches when I am doing my videos, but in the written pattern, I do include centimeters for everything. Okay, get my pins ready to go. And we're gonna sew this exterior with a 1/4 inch seam allowance or 6mm seam allowance. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and at the end. I do trim this a bit. I trim about half of it off. And then I find the best success in turning it right side out when I do some snips here at this rounded part. Now you can also do some little triangle shaped snips next to these convex curves, but I find that when it's turned right side out and when you press it well, that it stays curved nicely and that you don't have to clip these curves. However, if I'm doing say a vinyl or something like that, which would be a little thick for this small of a stocking, but for my larger stockings, if I'm doing something like vinyl, I will clip these exterior curves. So I'm going to set this aside. Now for the lining. The lining, I am going to start at a 1/4 inch. And then I am going to taper to a 1/2 inch or 1.3 centimeter seam allowance. Now this is important. You want your lining to fit nicely into the exterior. All right, here as I get close to the end, I just taper right back to 1/4 inch. You want your lining to fit nicely into your exterior, and you can either use a smaller pattern piece or just a larger seam allowance. And that'll help it fit nicely. All right, I'm going to set that aside. And now I'm going to sew the cuff together, back to 1/4 inch seam allowance. This one I'm not going to trim, but I am going to press open the seam with my fingers. It's kind of small to use the iron on, so I'm just going to use my fingers. Then I'm going to fold this in half, match up this seam, and pin it. And then turn the whole thing, the rest of it right side out. I'm forming a loop. This fabric is being a bit stiff. There. So I have my loop. I still need to do a better job matching up these top raw edges. This is a very small project we're working with, and sometimes it can be a little tough because of the smallness of it. It's easier to make these larger actually. Okay, so I'm going to fold it in half and pin over here just so I have this ready to go for the next step of matching these pins up with the seam. All right, so here's the top of my stocking. I'm going to set it aside. For this next step, it really helps to have some sort of seam point turner. This is a seam creaser and point turner, and I like the rounded edge. But anything long that you can use to turn things inside out can also work for this step. We're going to take just the exterior and turn it right side out. Then I like to use my seam crease rounded part to push out the toe. All right, and I flatten it nicely. And there it is, turned right side out. You can go press it right now, or you can wait till the end to press it. And then our lining, which does not get turned because this is going to fit nicely inside here. Though I kind of stick the creaser in to the toe so I can push it into the right spot. I'm going to, as I push this into place, I'm also going to pin the top. Now I like to have the lining seam go one way and the exterior seam go the other when I am matching up these side seams. That'll help reduce bulk in the seam. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. All right, so I'm going to push this lining in just a little bit more. And now this next step is important. When we sew everything together, there will be one seam that will be not visible, but it'll still be left exposed, and that's this top seam. It'll be underneath the cuff, so you have to search for it to find it. Ouch! Got myself with my pen. You have to search for it to find it, but it'll still be exposed. So I like to finish this seam, this top seam on the stocking, and this raw edge of the cuff. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can use your zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, or you can use another overcast stitch perhaps, but I'm going to use my serger, and since my serger is over there and hard to video, I'm going to do that off video and then come back. All right, I'm back. I have serged the top of these. You can see my serger had a little trouble with how small this was, especially because my camera equipment was in the way. All right, if you were going to do a loop, now is the time to get out your piece of ribbon. This is 3 inches long. I can't remember how many centimeters that is. I'm going to fold it in half, place it on the inside outer seam, so when I'm looking at my stocking, it'll be the one on the left. It'll be on the inside, and I'm going to match it up with the seam, which this is dark fabric, so I don't know if you can see the seam. I'm going to match it up there, and then I'm going to sew across it just with a straight stitch back and forth a couple times to fasten it in place. Now these aren't going to be getting lots of weight like my big stockings might be, but I always like to sew several times just to make sure that they're in there well. Okay, and now I'm going to take my cuff and put it inside my stocking at the top. Now for this step, I like to use clips instead of pins because it can be quite thick. And I have tried it with this seam on the outside on the left, and I've tried it with it on the right, and I prefer it with it on the left, even though it's a little thicker with the hang loop, the hanger as well. It just ends up a little better, the final result. So I'm going to match up these side seams, the seam of the cuff and the seam of the stocking, and clip it. And I'm going to fold this cuff to find where the halfway point is and match that up with this seam on this side. And then I will add another clip on each side of these. Looks like I might need to adjust this a little bit because I've got a little extra fabric on this side. And not quite enough on the other, so I'm just going to adjust this a little bit. There, that's perfect. Okay, with such a small piece, we're going to sew from the inside like this. And if you have a button that you can press to keep the needle down when you stop, I would press that. I did increase my stitch length to 3 because this can be thick. And we are stitching once again with an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Sorry, did I say 8? I meant quarter. 6 millimeters, 1/4 inch. And if you use a thicker fabric, this is a really tricky part. Oh, sounds like my thread is stuck, so I'm going to have to fix that. All right, so you are now completed with the sewing. With my larger stockings, I do like to do a final top stitch, and I do that sometimes with these little ones. I'll show you how I do it if you want to. Maybe once you iron it, maybe it's not staying as nicely as you'd like it to. So with the cuff up, I push the seam allowance so it's towards the body of the stocking. I increase my stitch length again. I have to fit this underneath my foot until I pull back the cuff fabric until I'm stitching on the lining. And I stitch it all the way around. And then I sew all the way around. And it's kind of a squish because of the cuff and because this is so small. So if you can get your fabric to stay down just by ironing, I would omit that step. And I turn it. And move everything into place. And it is all complete. It just needs to be pressed one final time, and then my little cutlery stocking will be complete. You can use this for cutlery, you can use it as a decoration. I know it might seem kind of overkill to have it fully interfaced and lined, but this will last you forever. This is good quality. And if you do want to make it easier to make or fewer steps, you can definitely adjust it so that there's no lining. You would then have to make sure that you finish the inside seams, and they would be visible on the inside. You can skip out on the interfacing and have it be floppier. You can definitely make it easier to make, but I think the final result of this looks very nice when you include all the interfacing and the lining. Thanks for sewing this miniature stocking with me. Here it is in its place of honor at my table setting, or if you want it on the side, you could put it on the side. I think it's really cute and it adds a lot to your holiday table. I can't wait to see what you come up with. You can share in the RP Learn Facebook group or in the Toriska Bags Facebook group for my patterns. I hope you'll check out my website, toriska.com, and see my other sewing patterns, including the full-size version of this, the Yuletide stocking. And have a fun sewing summit and a great Christmas.